Well, thanks, Bill, for coming.
No problem.
If y'all don't know Bill King, so he's a litigation attorney with 22 years experience at least. He is also a critical care tech for about 12 years, retired from EMS. And he says he's a resurrected firefighter.
Yep.
With North Greece right now currently. We really appreciate having you here to talk about legal issues in EMS. So.
No problem. Glad to do it. I've done this type of lecture to a more thorough extent for paramedic classes, the critical care transport paramedic class in the Finger Lakes. It's a couple of EMT classes here and there. So, and then individual organizations as well as they see fit. So I enjoy doing it. Some of my comments may be archaic to some of you, more relevant to others. But I find myself in the courtroom all the time. I'm the litigator. So I do criminal defense work, mostly family law and domestic relations work, because that's what puts me in the courthouse. But when a civil matter ends up going to trial, I'm the one that's sitting next to you, defending it or prosecuting it. And then I'm also, because of my background, I deal with the Department of Health. So I've defended many paramedics, many EMTs, firefighters over the years with the Department of Health when they start going after your credentials. So they know me quite well. And now actually it was Ross Zastro that used to run around in the Jeep and everything. Now it's Ed Major that's doing it. So he took Ross's place. So I deal with the Department of Health as well. So I know those administrative procedures, and just because of my background at the very least. So all of those things essentially will jump into the civil versus criminal elements, okay? So there's two different systems, legal systems out there. There's the civil system, and then there's the criminal system. Bottom line, criminal system, you could go to jail. Civil system, 99% of the time you can't go to jail. If you're in contempt of court or you've done civil contempt, broken a court order or something like that, a judge could put you in jail. In the civil system, worst case scenario, it's a 6-month vacation. Okay? But if there's a chance of you going to jail, you are in the criminal system. And there's all sorts of different statutes that cover that. It's mainly one is the penal code, but there's the vehicle and traffic code also that has the DWIs and driving without a license and all those fancy ones. There's the public health law and all those types of things that can land you in jail. That gets you in criminal court. Everything else is civil. So in criminal court, it's the state of New York against so-and-so, because you have done a wrong against the state. Even though you may have shot somebody in particular, you've done wrong against the state. In the civil matter, it's person against person, company against company, entity versus entity. And the other biggest point regarding civil is you might not be going to jail, but they can hit you in the pocketbook, which is one of the reasons why somebody's ass is in a sling. They've called Bill King to come in here to talk to you about getting hit in the pocketbook. Because many individuals out there will just see that, oh, big company, they got insurance, car accident, they got insurance, all these types of things. Go after the insurance company, and then we'll end up, I can get a big dollar amount. Because everybody wants that easy buck. And that's why Celino and Barnes has their ads, and William Mattar has their ads and whatnot. Yeah.
I like Phil's better.
Yeah. So that's the big difference between civil and criminal, okay? Most of the stuff you guys may run into is probably going to be civil. You got certain laws, certain regulations, certain codes that you have to follow in doing your practice. That doesn't mean that you're relieved of any kind of criminal liability, because as you can see what's been happening with the police in particular, if you handle someone a certain way, you could be facing criminal charges. And, for assault, for battery, for improper restraint, for kidnapping, and then potentially murder or manslaughter, depending on how that goes. But most of what you guys are going to be facing is in the civil side. You've, violated a Department of Health rule. You got your protocols. You didn't follow your protocols. You didn't do what you were supposed to. Therefore, your either card is on the line, your job is on the line, or, God forbid, somebody's going after you for money. And if you got a house, you got a wife, you got a trust fund, something like that, that's all at jeopardy. Everything you've worked for in your career is then in jeopardy. So, in the civil realm with you guys is that you got ordinary negligence, and there's that term of malpractice out there. Your doctors have malpractice, I have malpractice. There's a slight difference between the two. Malpractice is a type of negligence. So with negligence, it's a civil wrong. It's what we call a tort. You've done something wrong against somebody. And what you have done wrong is that you were supposed to act in a certain way or not act in a certain way. You violated that duty, and that then led to some kind of damages. And that's what the ordinary negligence is. I have argued over the years that if one of you guys is on the job, you're treating a patient, is that you should not be treated under just ordinary negligence. Because the way they describe everything is you have a duty to act, you have a certain way that you have to treat a patient. They show with some kind of symptoms and whatnot. Protocol says you must do this, okay? Now, I used to work for the company that used to be across the river over there, and we always had a protocol, of course, and I used to fight like hell with them because they were setting themselves up. No patient may walk. You must carry every patient, okay? Every patient has to be carried, no matter what the circumstances are. So they created an SOP, and that SOP is in writing that every patient must be carried. If you do not carry that patient, and they even slip on the ice or whatever the case may be, and they get hurt, you violated your own SOP, and therefore you violated your duty to that patient, and now that patient is hurt, and cha-ching, cha-ching. Okay? So when you are creating, for the administration, when you're creating SOPs, you got to be careful about, are you guys setting yourself up to too high of a standard? You know, the other thing I used to play with, and this is kind of a preview as to a much longer course or program that I could do with much more in depth, but the KED, okay? Do you know what the KED is? Oh, okay, just wondering. I found it buried in the back of the fire truck, and I wasn't sure if we even used it any longer.
I don't know if I've seen one.
Gotcha, okay. So it was a rule, right? KED had to be placed on any patient in a car accident, mechanism of injury, regardless of whether they had a neck pain or whatever. You could not assess that patient and decide whether to put a KED on somebody. So we had to pull out the damn contraption out of the rig, strap it into the patient, my words, turn that off for a second, waste a lot of time instead of just moving the patient safely in a better way, okay? But you were setting yourself up. If you did not put them in the KED and you just put them on the backboard, and you put them in the back of the rig, and your partner's driving and hit a damn pothole somewhere in Rochester, just pick one, okay? And all of a sudden their neck became more damaged because you didn't put the KED on, and they're in a wheelchair. Not only are you going to feel bad, you're going to be hitting the pocketbook, and so is your company, and then that means your job, and that means your career, and that means everything else that you've worked yourself to, for family and yourself. Put it all in jeopardy. So that scare factor was the main rule to make sure everybody put a KED. That's why quality assurance, quality approved, yep, came about, okay? What's going on out there, and why aren't we following the rules, or should the rules be changed? And thank goodness, my understanding is the KED is not really a requirement anymore, correct?
It's not a requirement, it's
Gotcha.
another tool
It's
in
an
the
option,
toolbox.
right.
We still have to have it on the truck.
On the truck, gotcha, okay, so, but that's negligence. You have a duty to do something, you don't do it, you breach that duty, and there's a probable cause to some kind of damages, all right? That's a preview for a much later lecture, more in depth as to what all that entails. However, medical malpractice is more of you see the commercials, 9 out of 10 dentists recommend, okay? It's a standard of care. So because I would absolutely say that you guys are making judgment calls out in the field. This isn't just, I have chest pain on a scale of, say 6 out of scale of 10, okay, well, what was the mechanism? Well, it was based on a car accident, okay? Well, okay, you're not supposed to give nitro. Well, back in my day, you're not supposed to give nitro, okay? That's what the protocol says. But in the judgment was, oh shit, I had this chest pain in the first place before the accident, and that's what caused the accident, and there was low mechanism of injury and things like that. Now you're making an assessment. You're making a judgment, okay? Now, based on that judgment and whether you followed all the assessment tools that you have available to you, based on that judgment, 9 out of 10 paramedics, 9 out of 10 doctors would have done the same thing that you did. And that's what malpractice is. And that's what I would argue for any EMT, paramedic, provider of any type, is that that's what you're doing. You're making a judgment call, and as long as 9 out of 10 doctors would, or paramedics, EMTs, based on your training, same facts and circumstances put in front of them, would have done the same thing, then you should not be responsible.
But doesn't the plaintiff always find that 10th one that says, oh no, we wouldn't have done
There
it?
is an expert out there for everything.
Right.
So, yes, absolutely.
Is that reasonable person theory? Is that part of
Reasonable person. Now, here's the funny thing with reasonable person, and I could go into more depth with the with a future lecture. However, reasonable person with your training, with your experience, with your expertise, with the tools that you got available to you. So it's not just the guy Joe Schmo walking down the street. It's almost like you compared to you, but it's you compared to him, compared to him, compared to her, with the same training, with the same experiences and things like that. So that would be how I would, and then I would argue that's exactly what you guys are doing no different than what a doctor does in the ER, or a nurse, or some kind of practitioner in the ER. You're doing it in the field with more limited, well, it's getting better and better, but limited, availability. You're not running around with a CT scan or, although they are for the stroke unit, but they're doing that now too. So
Only for stroke.
yes, right. So. Now, the question came up, Kevin gave me the question earlier about malpractice insurance. There's only certain things you can't get insurance for just ordinary negligence, unless it's automobile insurance. And that's because it's a law that says that we have to have automobile insurance. So homeowners insurance will cover a certain negligence. That's because it says you gotta have homeowners insurance, okay? But I can't just get insurance for walking down the street and that against somebody that's going to club me over the head, and then I'm going to be assaulted. Okay, suffer a brain injury, and ka-ching, ka-ching. Can't get insurance for that. So there's only very few realms that you can actually get insurance for. I question as to whether medical malpractice insurance is available to the EMT or paramedic, is because you are under a ordinary negligence realm. Until it's actually confirmed that it's a medical malpractice realm, I don't think the medical malpractice insurance actually fully covers you. Okay? But I guess it all depends on how the policy is written. But it won't cover you while you're driving the ambulance, right? It won't cover you, it will cover you only in patient care scenarios, and it would have to be based on your judgment. And medical malpractice insurance, essentially covers anybody that's licensed. Now, you guys are only certified. You're not licensed. So I have a license to practice law, therefore I'm able to get legal malpractice insurance. Doctors, nurses, they're all licensed. They can get their own medical practice insurance. But malpractice insurance will only cover malpractice. And I think that's where the difficulty, that gray area, are you doing a professional judgment call where there's malpractice versus whether you're in the ordinary negligence realm. So, but that doesn't mean don't explore it. Don't somebody maybe just write a policy and say, yeah, I'll cover this. Now, insurances will mainly cover damages up to a certain amount. Just like your car insurance, you can pay X amount of dollars, and you'll only have insurance up to a certain amount. It will pay for the legal fees for the attorney to cover, because they're protecting their asses from having to pay out on the insurance policy. And then, but anything above that insurance policy is your risk. So, I'm hoping I never have anybody go after me for legal malpractice above $1 million, because that's what my policy is. And after that, then they can garnish my wages until I die, I guess, because they're not going to get it any other way. So that's the difference between civil and criminal to start off with, negligence and malpractice to go on, and then a little tidbit regarding the malpractice insurance. So when we talk about, any questions about any of that so far? And please jump in anytime, just don't jump at me, that's all. So, okay. So, oh, and by the way, if you have a scenario, please change the names to protect the guilty, please, I appreciate that. So, and then I'll give you my card afterwards, you can pass it on to whoever needs to. So, all right, so let's talk about the negligence and the duty and how that all plays out regarding refusals in particular. Because they're the most difficult types of scenarios that are out there in the first place. Okay, first of all, everybody but a small group has the right to not only refuse treatment and transportation, but you are supposed to get consent before you even treat that patient. It's a double-edged sword. So, if the way I used to practice, I recommend it for everybody, even though it's archaic, is that as you're treating the patient, you tell them what you're doing to them and for them, right? You're communicating with them, you're talking to them. Lucy, I'm going to give you this nitro, I'm going to put it under your tongue, just let it dissolve, don't chew it. Is that okay? That's the trick. You're asking them. If they don't say no, then you assume that or they've affirmed or they've gone along with what you've asked. So, I'm going to do it, is that okay? If they say no, that's when you pull your hand back and go, oh, wait a minute. By the way, now you got to go into the other elements of a refusal as to she could refuse, Lucy or anybody else, can refuse certain treatments, entire treatments, be treated and then refuse transportation. They have that right.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So, I remember through class we were told that as far as like refusal for transport, they could say they refuse.
Right.
But if they're physically getting on your gurney and allowing you to put the seatbelts on, they're saying, no, I don't want to go, but they don't get off your gurney. Like, where's the line there?
If they're saying no, it's just like they used to say in the 80s, no means no.
Okay.
And no means no still today, but that's when it started. So, no means no, okay?
So they could say no, they could get in your ambulance,
Yes.
refuse to get out, and
Right.
then say they don't want to be transported.
And that's when the guys with the star badges or the other badges show up and they say, this person doesn't want to go, but they won't get out of my ambulance.
Okay.
So, now, we used to, that company across the river, that used to be across the river, used to get into a problem every once in a while when people wanted to get across the city, but the taxi cab wasn't available and, their friend wasn't there to pick them up.
Yeah.
They'd say, I got the bellyache and we're all the way up on Norton, but they want to go to Strong.
Yeah, it didn't change.
No, I didn't think it did, so I thought this was relevant to all of you. So, you get to Strong, you open up the back, the person was fine the whole time, and they bolt and go. And they needed a taxi ride.
First.
Yes. There you go. Right? So, had patients, halfway there. I don't want to go anymore, probably because that's where they had to go get their, drug pickup. And, that's, now we're in the middle of the city, and okay, I want to get out of my ambulance. Okay? They have the right at any point in time to say no. So you have to respect that, and then we'll go into the other elements as to how to protect your own asses about all of that. So you're supposed to be communicating with your patient. You're supposed to be asking them regarding every type of treatment. Okay? Anywhere along the line, they can say no. So we can, as you're about to start an IV, I'm going to poke you with this. We got to start an IV. Is that okay? As you're sticking it into their arm. Okay? So, but if they say no, that's when you pull back. Ma'am, look, I got to start an IV because just in case I have to. Well, I'm deathly afraid of needles. Well, if I don't give you this needle and I don't put this in your arm, then if I got to give you more life-saving elements, meds and whatnot, I'm not going to be able to do that. Therefore, I need to do this. Is that okay? And once they finally say yes, but if they say no, no means no. I personally had to take a patient out of Shore Winds all the way up on Beach Avenue. Had to go to Strong, of course. So, CHF all the way up to here. She did not want to be intubated, okay? Through her gurgly breaths, she said, no intubation, no intubation. And I explained to her, plain and simple, if I don't intubate you, you are going to die. Plain and simple. She says, I don't care. I don't want to be intubated in her gurgly breath, in between breaths. Okay? I did everything else. She allowed me to do everything else. Lasix, I hear you don't do Lasix anymore, but, everything. Nitro paste, everything else. No intubation, she said. Okay? I watched her die. Plain and simple. Watched her die on the way to the hospital. got somewhere towards the middle of the city or, towards the lower end of the city, and she died. But I had to honor her request. She said no intubation. She allowed everything else to go. She was not going to be intubated again.
So we have a checkbox
Mm-hmm.
on our PCR.
Yep.
EMS chart that says consent.
Yes.
So if you have somebody sign,
Mm-hmm.
such as a section 1 patient signature.
Right.
Is that consent then implied that they have agreed to all the treatments?
I would argue, because of course it all depends on whether you're talking to a judge or another side, but I would argue that is yes until they say no otherwise, right?
So
Because
if somebody checks that box
Mhm.
that says consent was obtained.
Right.
Then they don't need to document each procedure that says that they've asked.
that they've asked and they consented, correct, right, so. So at any point in time, they can refuse, and they should be given consent for all the treatment. Otherwise, it's civil battery, because you've now touched somebody against their will and, did damage to them, so.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, about your story with the innovation,
Mhm.
like, obviously you said you watched your pass,
Mhm.
because you didn't want that. How do you go about that, like, at that point, is it just, people taking your word for it? Because you can't speak
Oh,
for
yes,
yourself now.
yes, which of course, thank goodness, you always have a partner, and, I always argue my partner will throw me under the bus quicker than, vouch for me, so, that's, so, but yes, it was, luckily, or not luckily, you always got somebody else around you, whether it's fire department, whether it's, your partner, supervisor, somebody, so.
Okay.
Right.
Then I go about it.
And then it comes down to proof. She's dead, what is she gonna do? She can't testify to say that I did.
Right.
She didn't say it, so.
Yeah.
So it's my word against nobody's word.
Against you.
Yeah,
All right.
we have a seance. Bring them back.
You know you have a serious problem with a judge or a jury takes out a Ouija board.
Go buy some slugs.
For sure. All right, so that's regarding what your duty is. So your duty is to, provide treatment to the best of your abilities under the circumstances. And you're supposed to get consent, or they absolutely have the right to refuse. Remember I said that most people have the right to refuse.
Okay.
Yep.
You're
Right.
about to touch on it.
Yes, exactly. So in order to be able to refuse, you have to have the capacity or competency to be able to do so. By law, minors cannot. And we'll go into minors in a second. But give me some other ideas as to who does not have the requisite mental capacity or competency to be able to make a decision for themselves. Okay, yep,
Yeah. Old demented ladies with,
Mhm.
Healthcare proxies, that kind of thing.
yep,
Under the care of the state.
yes.
Medicare state, yeah, okay.
Yep. And are drunks,
No.
drug addicts?
Nope.
It depends, right, depends on, I've seen
But
some
they have
walking
an
around with a
understanding of their current circumstance.
Yes, exactly. Traumatic brain injuries? It's still a pending case, so, okay, I can give you at least some details. Got a case down in Schuyler County right now. Guy was in a car accident. Big bump on his head, clearly a head injury, okay? He wakes up in the hospital down at Sayre because they transported him out of Schuyler County because they're not a trauma unit to Sayre to the trauma unit down there. As soon as I saw that, he was charged with assaulting one of the nurses in the Schuyler County Hospital. He doesn't remember a damn thing from when the time he got into the car to when he woke up 2 days later in Sayre with 2 state troopers standing outside his door. And what was the first thing that I looked at was that he had a head injury for sure. I mean, just the pictures alone showed it. And therefore, could he have the capacity to intentionally assault this nurse? Okay, that's how I was using it. But for this example, is that does he have the capacity to be able to refuse treatment or transportation and not go to the hospital? Nope. So traumatic brain injuries, traumatic head injuries, the dementia that you were talking about, certain medical conditions. How many times have we had a diabetic, right? Is semi-conscious, not incoherent, thrashing around, almost like I don't want to be treated. I don't want to be treated. Well, they don't have that capacity to be able to understand, okay, which I'll go into one of the other elements here. So now after that you've given them some, good bug juice and whatnot, and now they've come about, and they go, oh shit, this happens to me about every 2 months or so, and I don't want to go to the hospital, I'm just going to go there, and then, I know how to treat it and everything like that. Now they may have the capacity to be able to refuse transportation to the hospital, but they didn't have the capacity to refuse the treatment that was going on.
It's a kind of a, the dementia thing, the one that kind of bothers me a lot.
Yes.
Is because there's kind of two sets of standards here, right? Do they have the capacity to make a decision on whether they want treatment? And we run into this all the time, especially with the assisted living facilities that have memory care units.
Yep.
That say, well, they have dementia. Well, that doesn't mean that they don't have capacity to refuse treatment.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? But there's a different set of standards then for obtaining consent for a signature too.
Yes.
Right? So as long as they understand that, hey, you're the ambulance driver and you're taking them to the hospital, they can sign for themselves.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They might think it's 1917 and the Kaiser's still in power. Doesn't matter, right? They still can sign for themselves.
Yes.
However, they might not have the capacity to refuse a treatment. Then,
That's correct.
but they have the capacity to sign with them.
Yes, because just picture, to take it one step further, is that with the Alzheimer's, you got that sundowner syndrome, right?
Syndrome, yeah.
They're great until 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and then, so you can have somebody early morning having chest pain and say, I don't want to go to the hospital. Well, she's got Alzheimer's. Don't care. She, satisfy the criteria that I'll go over regarding capacity and competency, and she doesn't want to go to the hospital. She doesn't have to go to the hospital. She's diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Okay, well, she's okay now. If I came back at 8 o'clock tonight, it might be a different scenario or a different situation. So it's what's going on right then and there, which is why in the legal field we run into a problem every once in a while because signing wills. Somebody may have a lucid moment and be able to sign a will and know exactly what they want and tell us exactly what they want in that will and, write somebody out, but then 2 days later not even remember that they met with you. So, which is why we got so many witnesses and everything like that, and we go through a whole series of questions to find out how competent they are, they understand what they're doing, similar to what we're going to end up doing here. Age. In New York State, I don't care what they tell you in the EMT class or paramedic class, in New York State, there's no such thing as a court-ordered emancipated minor. Under 18, they need to go to the hospital. Let the social worker, caseworker, whoever at the hospital figure that part out, okay? Except for one exception, and I'll get into that in a second. So, minors. There is no such thing as an emancipated minor in New York State for the decision-making authority. An emancipated minor, because I do family law, is you are no longer financially responsible for that child. Child support purposes mainly, okay? That child wants nothing to do with me. I'm under no more of an obligation to financially support that child. They're emancipated, okay? It has nothing to do with decision-making over your healthcare decisions. Somebody has the authority over that child. Even that child that's in foster care, there's somebody that has the authority to make certain decisions for that child. So you get into a situation of, on the basketball court in the city, they've got a sprained ankle. Oh, no, I've sprained the ankle before. Don't worry about it. I'm 16 years old. I'll just go home and ice it. It's no big deal. You have no choice. You have to treat them, and you have to take them to the hospital. They don't have the authority to be able to make those decisions. So what do we do in the meantime? We do our best to try to get a family member or somebody who's responsible for that child to help make that decision. And sometimes we stick around on scene, sometimes we try to do it over the phone, sometimes we just tell them to meet us at the hospital. You know how that works out in the streets. But they do not have the authority, except the one exception is the scenario where you go to the household and grandma is 36 years old. And great-grandma is 36 years old, right? Grandma is 21 years old, right? You see this? Child is 15 years old, okay? And they have a newborn that's coughing and it sounds like croup, all right? That child, because it's an old archaic belief, is that 15-year-old has the authority to make healthcare decisions regarding their child. The belief is that if you're old enough and mature enough, I can't believe I can't even say this with a straight face. If you're old enough and mature enough to have a child, then you have the right to make those healthcare decisions over that child.
Now, what about the 15-year-old mom
Right.
of that child?
Yes.
That makes her have the authority.
Yes. Over the newborn, so
Over
to
the
speak.
newborn, but what
Right.
about herself?
No.
So despite the fact that she has a child.
Right. So if it's a 15-year-old having the asthma attack,
Yeah.
then it's her mother or her guardian or whoever's watching her that has the authority. She only has the authority over that child or like her pregnancy type of thing.
So I gotta say that is contrary to
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
we have ever been
Yes.
taught
Right.
in the world of
Yes.
Yes.
EMS, and that's a very important point.
It is.
To understand.
Right.
Because there's, this day. and
Now, if
age-
they're married, they never
That's
get
different.
married. That's a different story.
Right, but if they're unmarried,
If they're
and
unmarried,
they're under 18,
They have the
despite
authority-
the fact that they've had a child,
they have the authority only over that child. It's healthcare decisions. So if 36-year-old great grandma, who's the head of the matriarch of the household, says you're taking that baby no matter what, she doesn't know what the hell she's talking about, then you can't. You can explain to them till they're, you're blue in the face. You can try to continue to express to mom that, the 15-year-old that it needs to happen. This is the best case scenario. But the 15-year-old has the final decision-making authority. Unless somebody can say, literally produce a court order that says they have the assigned authority, guardianship over that newborn. Then it becomes even more difficult when the adults are not in the household. Now you got to try to find an adult who's responsible because, the 16-year-old is watching the 15-year-old and the 12-year-old and the newborn.
how does that hold up in court? If you are unable to have that authority, guardian, parent, whatever, in front of you, and you try to do this over the phone.
Right. Phone makes it difficult. I haven't read any cases. Here's a little tidbit about the legal, what happens in court. A lot of cases aren't published.
I don't want to set.
Yes, no, right. A lot of cases aren't published, so it's not like you can just read, or watch it on the news. It's only those that get challenged that end up being published.
Right.
So it's hard to say whether there are any cases out there. I'm sure there are cases out there. There's just nothing to be able to read about. However, that it becomes more risky because that family member who you got on the phone is not seeing what you're seeing.
Right.
So
Or you
now-
don't even know necessarily if that really is.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
So I would err on the side of caution and say, we're gonna take them to the hospital, why don't you meet us over there? Then let the, social worker, decide. You're not here to be able to see what I'm seeing and make a decision, therefore, or we'll wait for you. I mean, to whatever extent you're allowed to do that, so. Come on
So
back.
you would not recommend.
Not
doing
over the
that
phone.
over the phone.
Not over the phone. Shit, in my view, it's just too risky.
Yeah.
So, all right, so that goes to the competency. All right, so let's go into these different elements regarding what goes into a proper refusal. So first of all, there has to be a thorough assessment. It's not just I laid eyes on the person, they passed the look test, and I thought everything was okay. Okay? So, there has to be so you're talking about, trouble breathing, the lung assessment, the cardiac assessment, the whole assessment. You got to go through the whole assessment. If they stop you from doing a part of that assessment, of course, that's got to be documented, and we'll talk about the documentation of all of this. However, there needs to be a thorough assessment of the patient. And the reason for that is you need to know what to be able to tell the patient. Now, they have to have the competency to be able to refuse everything that we've just been talking about. So I think we covered all of those conditions that I was. We really didn't talk about that. We kind of glossed over the drugs and the alcohol. Is that, it really comes down to what their tolerance is. you know, there's plenty of people that walk around here with a, you know, .20 and you'd never know it. Then you see it come up on a breathalyzer test and you're like, holy shit. So, but, you know, and then the drugs, what does it do, you know, to them? Assuming you're not taking them back from the brinks of death with some Narcan or something like that, so. All right, so you have to do a thorough assessment because you have to inform the patient as to what their situation is. Okay, and this isn't just gloss over it. This means go beyond and let them know what the dire situation is. So let's go back to the person, now it's a male, you know, older male that's got a ankle injury on the basketball court, okay? Are you gonna tell him he's gonna die from an ankle injury? Probably not. What's the foreseeable, reasonable consequences of not getting either treated or transported to the hospital? So, you know, could he lose the leg? Absolutely, because if you got a blood vessel broken down there and, you know, if he's bleeding out, or if he doesn't treat it properly and it doesn't set properly, you could talk about surgeries and all those types of things. So you should be telling the patient, hey, look, if you don't get this treated, you don't let me treat it and you don't let me take you to the hospital, go get it treated, you may end up, you know, losing your leg.
Okay. Realistic terms to the situation.
Yes, exactly. So now when we're talking about our trouble breathing, our cardiac, a lot of our medical, yes, you could die from this. Now, as I mentioned before, if their chest pain was because the Buffalo Bills were finally in the Super Bowl and they wanted to watch the end of the game and they didn't want to go to the hospital, then they had that right. But you have to let them know that, in fact, you could die from this.
There's like 8 minutes left, hold on.
Give me another nitro.
Probably ain't gonna happen in your lifetime. Don't worry about it.
Let me just sit down in this drunk box.
You probably want to watch it with them, actually, so. You pulled the shitty shift that you had to work on the Super
I
Bowl.
went to my first Bills game in 1966.
So, okay, no matter what their reason is, you have to inform them as to what the foreseeable possible consequences are. Okay? And I would suggest even going one step further than that. You know, going beyond. Like I said, you know, they can cut your leg off, you know, if you really don't get this treated. Okay? You could die. Can't get much, you know, worse than that, but you can die. If this is left untreated, you don't get it checked out, you don't let us treat you, you could die. All right? So, they have to be informed. Now, the reason why this goes hand in hand with the competency is that they have to understand those consequences. So it's a two-way street. You have to do your job to be able to communicate all those consequences, okay? But you need to check with them that they understand. And just by saying, do you understand, just doesn't fly, in my opinion. Have them repeat it back to me, okay? Do you realize that you can die? Yeah. Okay, no. Tell me that you know that you can die. Okay? So I would go that step further just to cover your asses, that make them repeat it back to you so that you know they know what the consequences are. And if they blow it off, then that's their responsibility, or you know, that's their right to blow it off for whatever the reason is that they don't either want the treatment or they don't want to go to the hospital. Because people have the right to die as well. I mean, bottom line. You can't assist somebody in dying, but you can, right, exactly.
How does this work with that demented patient that thinks it's 1917?
Right.
So I understand that I can die.
Mhm.
I understand that I'm probably having a heart attack. I'm Dave, I'm in my house,
Mhm.
It's 1917, and I understand that I'm having a heart attack. I only made 3 of those 4 orientation questions.
Right.
Where do we go from there?
Yeah, I would.
I really don't want anything, I want to die at home, I'm comfortable with that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's Tuesday, the 5th of July, 1917, and the Kaiser is still in power.
Right. Yeah.
Where do we go with
I would say that they're not oriented to, you know, fully time, place, and person. So I would say that they don't have the capacity to.
And that's when we have to get the guys with their signing star badges.
Yes.
Say, hey, you're
Potentially, yes.
However, they're not gonna do anything for medical background unless they're a danger to.
themselves or others, right.
themselves.
So then the
If
person.
somebody wants to stay home and die, and they don't have the capacity to make that decision, they don't meet MHA criteria.
Like, but they say,
So then what do we do?
I wanna die.
Call the supervisor.
And that is the reason why,
And I tell them, you gotta find a way to transport this patient to the hospital.
and that is the reason why I was always glad to be a critical care tech rather than a paragod, because I could just get on the phone with the doc and say, what do you want me to do? So,
Well, I mean, we can still call
Yeah, we
medical. and
still
say,
yes,
hey,
yes, and that's
What
the
do we
lesson
do?
from that, other than me just being able to not have to make decisions. But yes, you can call medical control.
And if they
Let
say-
them make the decision, because remember, you're all acting under their medical license.
So, we call medical control
Mhm.
and the doc says, yep, they're not oriented, they have to come to the hospital, what do
Right.
we do, pick them up and tie them
I mean,
down?
pretty much.
Yep,
Alright?
make
But
sure.
in that case, aren't we supposed to have police presence transport with us when we restrain a patient?
And whatever your
No,
protocol
Only when
is.
they're in handcuffs.
Only when they're in handcuffs. So cravats don't count?
Cravat.
I'm sorry, soft restraints.
Soft restraints. You were supposed to use soft restraints, and you do not
Cravats are
need
soft.
to have police in the vehicle, only if they're in handcuffs.
Okay.
Alright.
Speaking of, guys in badges and drunks and people on drugs, you know, you get a guy who's, you know, drunk, he's on, or on drugs,
Mhm.
demonstrates, you know, alert and oriented times 4,
Mhm.
capacity, the whole 9, the cops are not gonna MHA him, he doesn't
Right.
wanna go. I've had cops go, no, he's going, he's voluntary, he's going, and the guy's like, no, I don't wanna go. You know what I mean?
Wait for the cops to go and then just send him on his way, because he doesn't have the right to.
Perfect.
If they're not gonna MHA him, and he's saying no.
Not going to
then-
jail for that one.
Yep.
Hopefully you don't get pulled over by that police officer.
Well, that's what I'm, yeah, I'm like, that's what I told the guy, I was like, bro,
'Cause he's gonna
like,
remember
walk
you.
into another district, you know, go somewhere else.
And as I tell all of my clients, there's a difference between the legal part of the world and then the realistic part of the
Yeah,
world.
exactly.
So, you know, so yes, I can tell you the legal part, and then having to deal with the practical is a different issue. So.
A, you have to educate them to remind them that there is no such thing as a voluntary mental health.
Yeah, I do that a lot, yeah. He's voluntary, I'm like, no.
And look, if you don't wanna do the freaking paperwork, then I don't wanna do the paperwork either.
Either, right.
You know what I mean?
And then, this might sound stupid, but there actually has to be a refusal.
Yeah.
They actually have to say no, okay? So that means you may have to stay on scene a little bit longer when they're, you know, maybe, kind of, I'm not sure, you know, Aunt Alice, what do you think? And, you know, the last time I was there, I sat for so long, and, you know, I really, you know.
Yeah, been there.
And then, you know, football game's starting tonight, and, you know, I just, you know, you may just have to stay on scene that much longer to get a yes or a no out of them. Now, of course, we've also run into this whole situation where, you know, we've pulled up on the scene, and the drunk that was laid out on the street, you know, has now got up, and now he's walking away and literally running away from you, okay? Yeah,
Call me
right.
when you catch him.
Exactly. So, if there's no patient contact, then that's very good. If there has been patient contact and they bolt from you, now you got the situation of, okay, can I treat that as a refusal? And I would say yes. I mean, they've made it clear, even though they didn't verbalize and say no, they are leaving your ability to be able to treat them.
Yeah.
Which means you can't write a chart that says no patient contact?
No.
Oh,
If-
okay.
Oh, yeah, no, we're not gonna pay for that.
Huh.
That still happens in this day. I don't think I've heard of that. Man, I haven't been around in a while.
Oh, no, that's not gone away.
Gotcha, okay, so, yes, I mean, bottom line, is that they have to say no. You have to get a no out of them. I would get 2 or 3 no's out of them. Okay, you know, she says, no, I don't wanna go to the hospital. Are you sure? You understand everything that I told you? Repeat back to me. Are you sure you don't wanna go? You know, is it, a lot of the cases that have been published or became known is that it's an argument between, or a factual issue as to whether or not the ambulance personnel refused to take the patient or whether the patient refused to go. And that's a pissing contest, of course, and it, you know, becomes a factual issue as to, you know, whether that was the case or not. So therefore, and then we'll get into documentation here, that's a good segue, but you need to get a no, and I would get a few no's. And as soon as that no turns to, well, I'm not sure, then you wait until you get a firm, 3 no's don't make a yes, type of situation, so. All right, yeah.
About motor vehicle accident question, you go there, there's like, there's 2 cars, but there's like 6 patients. I go up and I go, hey, are you okay? Do you wanna be evaluated? They're like, no, I'm good. And then they won't give you your name or anything. That's perfect, right?
Well, if you're doing triage, that's one thing. Because remember, triage is a heck of a lot different than, actually patient treatment.
Right.
So if somebody else comes along, I would say somebody else ought to come along to do a true assessment.
Okay.
Hey, look, I don't hurt anywhere, I'm not feeling sick, I wasn't even part of the accident, I follow, my car's over there, I didn't, oh, okay.
Right.
That's a different story.
The better
But-
question would be to ask if you're doing that kind of a triage would be, do you want to be evaluated?
Yeah, that's what I
Right,
asked
yeah.
them, do you want me to
Right.
evaluate you?
Right.
And usually they're like, no.
Right.
But that being said, I've also been told from different agencies that I've worked at, and some here not recently, but I've been told you have to get a sign off from every person that was in those vehicles.
That's because that's money driven.
It's money driven and it's probably, overboard, but it's probably best practices.
Right, and I mean, I
to say-
totally would, but
right.
sometimes you can.
Because
do
if
it
that
like, I
person
don't
shows up
want
in the
you-
hospital later and says that, oh yeah, I was in a car wreck and now my neck is bothering me.
Right.
And then, was there, somebody there? Well, yeah, the ambulance was there and everything like that. Now they're starting to ask questions as to, did anybody have contact with you? Oh yeah, I talked to you, he asked me if I was, if I wanted to be seen, so.
Yeah, yeah, because I've had that where.
But it's
where-
without a full assessment.
Yeah, well, I walk up, I walk to Kevin, hey, would you like me to assess you? I'm here, and he's like, nope, want nothing to do with you, won't give me his name, nothing.
Right. But then what's your next step? Well, you understand you were sitting in the passenger car, passenger side of this car, look at the car.
Yeah.
You might not feel anything right now, you may feel it later, can I at least, check you out?
Yeah.
So, it depends on.
Still should be documented that
And-
way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even though you don't have a patient to evaluate, you still document that. And
When patient refused all, you're gonna end up having to sign
yeah,
that
you
form.
sign a section 3 signature.
With
as
no
a crew
nurse
member.
though, that's like, cause now you got 2 you have.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
And the New York State one, so there's another signature.
Alright.
So what, like, I would be,
Well, the thing of it is,
The
if the
writer would be the
patient
nurse.
refuses evaluation,
Yeah.
and you document that in your chart, there's no billing ramifications to that, period, right? So, again, there's 2 different sides here. You're talking about legal issues to protect yourself, because this happens all the time. I hear about all the time of patients that walk into the ED or walk into an urgent care that then state that they were involved in an accident, and those are the questions that get asked by the providers in the urgent care or the ED. It's like, well, and then you get a phone call from them that says, hey, just FYI, this patient had a, C7 fracture. It's like, oh, well, okay.
How about that?
I go to look at the chart, and it's like, there's not even a chart, or
canceled on scene kind of thing?
cancel on scene.
Yeah.
Or patient refused all, and that's the documentation. So if that ever comes back to us, we don't have a legal leg to stand on.
No.
Because there's no chart there that says, you walked up to that patient and said, hey, you were the passenger in this car, would you like to be evaluated? No, I don't want anything to do with you. Well, you understand, even if they are saying no, you have to tell them, well, you understand that, this is the mechanism of injury. This would appear that, the possibility of you having a neck injury or whatever, you might not feel it right now, but
Yeah.
later on you might. So
Oh, yeah.
do you want to be evaluated?
Yeah, I always try to go through all that with them.
But you have to document that in your chart.
I-
And
If
that's,
you don't,
and that's the good segue. So what do
I
we
just
do
wanna
with
see, like,
this
a
in the
first name
charts?
At least, so,
Yeah.
John at the MVA passenger in this vehicle,
Yeah.
whatever.
So there used to be an art to writing the PCRs when they were in paper in 3, forms and, everything like that. There was an art to it. Now a lot of it is as reminders as to what you were supposed to be doing. But there's at least, hey, this box needs to be checked, that box needs to be checked, that kind of thing. So, but there is a commentary part, okay? So technically, legally, that these refusals should be, a full-length PCR. mostly commentary, of course. However, you're also going to document what did you find regarding to support the fact that you did a thorough assessment. You know, the BG, the EKG, you know, the O2 SAT and everything, ISPO2 and everything like that, okay? As to why and how you did a thorough assessment. So that's the part to protect you. You did a thorough assessment. And then regarding the actual refusal and what you informed the patient, you know, and it could be a commentary as if you were writing the book, or it could be literally, you know, everything in quotes, you know, back and forth, back and forth. But does that take time? Yes. But it's the one that's going to save you, you know, in your career as well as, you know, your life savings and everything else in the long run. So, you know, documentation. I was telling Kevin here that I got called to testify in a trial, and it was a vagrant that got hit by a car out in front of Gitsy's or whatever the hell they name it nowadays, on Monroe Avenue, right? Just stepped off the curb between two cars and got hit by a car. Okay? 3 years later, after I retired from that company that used to be across the river, okay, is that I get called into court. I was like, I call up the attorney. What the hell do you need me for, right? What the hell could be the possible? Well, the guy died. I was like, oh shit, not from the injuries. He clearly didn't get hit from the injuries. No, he died of cancer while the case was still pending. The defendant, of course, was trying to stretch it out as long as possible, hopefully to get him to die so that they had no more plaintiff to go after, and, you know, tactics. So, you know, but they read my PCR, and they said, oh shit, we found someone that can describe the scenario, where he was found, what the lighting was, all these types of things, because it was in my PCR. So when you're talking about scene description, where they were found, how they were found, what was the scenario around you, okay? Luckily, I'm familiar enough with Gitsy's in front of Monroe Avenue to know how many lamps there were and things like that. So some things were able to come back to my mind. However, 3 years after the incident, I wasn't going to remember any details. How many calls did I take after that? And then how long had I been out of the business, right? So what did I have to rely on? My PCR. And the one issue that I had to clear up was whether he was intoxicated or not. Because he was at Gitsy's at 2 o'clock in the morning on Monroe Avenue, a vagrant. He must have been intoxed, okay? And did he wander off into the street in front of the car in an intoxicated state? They were trying to use it as a defense. He caused his own injuries. In my PCR, it clearly said, the dash with a circle, no ETOH. And they looked at me and said, well, what did you mean by that when you wrote that? I was like, there was no alcohol either on his breath, among his person. There was no way that I had a clue that he had. Well, how did you know that it wasn't on his breath? Well, my PCR also said that I had him on oxygen by a non-rebreather, which means that when I talked to him, I had to be down in his face and taking off the non-rebreather and putting it back on him, and to be able to, I had to be down in front of him, next to him on the backboard, to be able to talk to him. Okay? Oh, well, their defense went right down the tubes because I didn't have any alcohol. But then they come up with, would you be surprised to learn that when he was in the hospital, they took blood, of course, and everything like that, and he had a BAC level of a 0.18 or something like that. I was like, no. They were like, well, how could you not be surprised by that? If you didn't smell alcohol, if you didn't, it's because he probably normally walks around with a 0.18. Their defense went right down the tubes, that the guy was intoxicated to the point that he caused his own injuries by walking out into the street. But it's all because of what was in the PCR. So it's because of the PCR writing that I was able to testify in court to help this guy with his case, even though he was long deceased.
I got raked over the coals once because I documented in the chart that in the old written PCR, it was drugs or alcohol suspected or whatever, right? So you had, I forget, probably 4 choices, none, whatever, right? So I documented because I smelled alcohol on the patient's breath, right? And in the deposition, 4.5 hours of the deposition, I got raked over the coals because everybody's trying to prove, culpability. Everybody's trying to prove, might have had a 5% or 10%, whatever. But I got raked over the coals at what made me an expert on the ability to smell alcohol on a patient's breath. And it's like, you know.
Come on, I've seen you at the bar a few times.
Yeah. And this is like 3 hours into this deposition. And so I tell people now, be careful, because that's still a required question.
Yes, right,
So be careful how you answer that question.
absolutely.
Because if there's nothing worse than sitting up and being made to look like a fool. But my response was, like, everybody had their attorney present, no offense to
Nope.
attorneys, but.
We got a job to do too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I said, well, you're all attorneys, y'all went to college, so you remember that first year of school, right? And you'd walk out of your dorm room and you'd walk in the hallway or into the bathroom.
You know what it smelled like.
Somebody puked in the sink, well, that's the smell.
Gotcha.
So,
Yep.
But still, it's like, it's just, you have.
Well,
to
because
be
your judgment is being
careful.
challenged.
Right,
That's-
yeah, you're gonna get challenged on stuff,
Yeah, but couldn't you just say, if they ask what makes you an expert, say I'm not, and let
Yeah.
them sort it out?
Yeah,
That's
potentially.
not part of my job, right?
I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I know what alcohol smells like. Right.
Yeah, well, at that point, I was angry and I
Yeah,
wanted
we
to.
got you.
I'm gonna take that on somebody.
A little ego there, that's all right.
Bartender, we
Not
had to
a
be
good
certified,
cook.
we had to
I'm
do our
gonna
class,
go
and we had to know the signs of people intox, because
Uh-huh.
technically we're not allowed to serve people if they're drunk.
Right.
Yeah, so anyhow, my question about the documentation, and is, of course, in this region now, we have to fill out this, form.
Yes, right.
And it's just checkbox.
Yes, right.
And I argue with people all the time that a checkbox is not the same as you taking those 26 letters of the alphabet, arranging them into words and sentences,
Absolutely.
and writing it out.
That's why I said there used to be an art in writing these things.
Yeah.
So, right.
So they still need to write out all of that information in a refusal.
They should.
Yeah, they should.
Yes.
Right. They should.
Now, and the reason why they should is because you never know how it's gonna play out.
Right.
Like I said, this guy, I used my PCR in a case that had lingered and needed me there, and saw my PCR and said, okay, I'll use him. All right. With my guy that was in a car accident, that was taken to Schuyler Hospital, with my background, I immediately found out what fire department showed up, who was the medics, who did the transport later on, and I got all those extra medical records that weren't in the actual medical record from the hospital. So I knew what was the condition of the car, how was he found, was he actually in the passenger seat or the driver's seat, different things like that may make a difference in my case, right? But it's also a wide range. I've used it in neglect cases in family court. Had a mother who was absolutely, they say that she was bombed off her ass, drunk beyond belief, trying to take care of this child and couldn't do that. Okay, child had some kind of medical condition. They said she was bombed when the caseworker talked to her at the hospital. Okay, I found out they were my buddies from Rural Metro, and I said, come in and talk to me. I think I'm going to need you to testify. Because they were communicating with that mother the whole time. Didn't smell any alcohol, right? Was coherent, was making a good conversation with them. Nobody else would have thought it'd be. So in that PCR, I found out who the two medics were, or who was on the ambulance that took that child to the hospital. So I know who interacted with that mother, and I called them in to testify in front of the judge in the neglect case. Workers' comp. Where was the patient found on the, with the ankle injury? Was he next to the pallet, or was he in the makeshift basketball court, off the back of on the back door? Was he within his job? Wasn't he within his job? You never know where these PCRs are going to pop up and how they're going to be worthwhile. And who knows who you may be helping either, just by your description. You may be helping somebody prove their case, or you may be able to help somebody disprove a bullshit case. So you just don't know how these PCRs are going to pop up. Now,
Put your opinions in there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And all politics aside. So now for you, turning over these PCRs to whoever is asking for them, of course you do it by subpoena, court order, releases from the individual patients and things like that. But I guess you could always ask, what do they need it for, to make sure that it's not something against your company itself.
I'll usually know when it's against us, because I
Yeah.
have a file of that too.
Sure, gotcha. So, but,
But it does happen.
Yes.
We do injure people, and
Mhm.
then I get that, and obviously I still have to give them the information.
yes, right,
But
right.
I just, to put it in perspective for you guys, like, this year alone, so far, since January, I've probably released 100 of the PCRs.
We get,
And that is-
two or three requests a week.
More than that. And that is only the ones that are from attorney's offices, that's not including the medical examiner and the
Yeah,
DA's
right.
office. Cause I only can count off the ones I billed for.
That's mainly car accidents?
It's all sorts of kinds of things,
Mhm.
yeah.
Now, to wind all this up into what's been happening with the COVID, is that you guys are, are only allowed to transport to a hospital facility, right? You can't go to take them to urgent care, you can't take them to their doctor's office and things like that. But what are we watching on the TV? Don't go to the emergency room. Well, shit, now you guys are stuck in the middle because you've been called, the only place you can go is to an emergency room. And they're telling you on the TV, don't go to the emergency room. And now you're stuck in the middle, which I suspect is many of the reasons for a lot of the sign-offs, is that, and then that's why I have to come here and speak to you
There's a great
all.
deal of fear
Right.
amongst the population
Absolutely.
about going to the emergency room.
Absolutely. And until we create a system, which I had written in papers at some point in time, looked great on paper, you sending, physician's assistants out in a car to go assess somebody at their house, right? Or you send somebody out to actually make a decision at the house, or you have the ability to be able to transport to an urgent care or their doctor's office or something like that, you guys are going to continue to be stuck in this situation.
That's happening, actually.
Yes, I'm glad to hear
On a
that.
very
So-
limited basis.
No, I got you.
But it's happening.
Right.
It's happening now.
And I guess one part about the informed patient, the consequences, is that just because you get a valid sign-off, doesn't mean, it's a great PR move also, but you guys are humans, you have feelings. Tell them what else they can do. Okay, I understand if you don't want to go to the hospital, that's your prerogative, you have the right to do that, you understand what the consequences are, but please, call your doctor. You're having trouble breathing, you've had this cough for 2 days, who the hell knows, you haven't had the thing stuck up your nose as of yet, but you're sick. Call your doctor at the very, give them some other, but those options should be the last thing you tell them because they've already refused, as opposed to, oh, instead of the hospital, why don't you call your doctor? Because now you're pushing off
We also
what your job
advise
is.
them to document what a patient can do for themselves in the meantime.
Oh, in the meantime, that's good, that's good advice too, so. This all makes sense?
Oh, yeah.
Make
When I add some
sure.
stuff to my PCRs.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
That's good.
Well, I'm glad that you say, because that's exactly what I teach, because I teach the documentation.
Mhm.
When I teach the refusals, I spend a good amount of time on the appropriate documentation
Yep.
of refusals and how to do it. And even after half of my lifetime, most of my lifetime in medicine, of one form or the other, working for the government's a lot easier, because you don't have to worry about, consent and all that crap. You just do it.
Because nobody's coming back in.
Nobody's gonna ask, right?
The military's a lot nicer. I was like, I had no idea that a minor that has a child is not capable of taking care of them.
Right.
So now
That
you
was
never
an
know
emancipating
something,
event,
don't you?
wasn't it?
Huh?
We used to call it an emancipating event.
Right.
You had a child, so you can make your own
Right,
decisions.
yeah, that's not the case.
No. Not in New York State, it may be elsewhere, but not in New
Yeah,
York State.
not here in New York State. That was a.
And a child can't go to the court saying, please emancipate me.
Yeah.
Court, there's no procedure, you don't know how many times I get phone calls that, I want to be emancipated. I can't, there's no procedure for me to go to court for you to be able to make that decision. Other questions?
Back to the insurance, is it worth
Yep.
getting like personal, like liability or personal professional insurance, like teachers get?
We have,
Mhm.
through Monroe,
Mhm.
Monroe covers everybody with a professional liability
Right.
insurance, and it's a high policy.
Right,
And obviously, we have auto insurance and workers' comp.
because you're working
insurance.
within your, right, so that the issue becomes, because you're always protected by whoever you're working for, because you're not just running around in your car out there, saving lives, that you're working under somebody, That, but if, you know, you're afraid that, close your ears for a second, you're gonna get thrown under the bus. Or it's gonna be greater than what they have, then, you know, right, then, you know, to protect yourself.
It might be more than that, I definitely.
It's $1 million per
Yeah,
occurrence.
gotcha, so.
$3 million.
But does that count if you no longer work here?
Oh, yeah,
Yes,
because it's
'cause
at
it
the
was
time.
The
a-
incident
Oh,
happened,
okay.
right, so.
Time it happened.
So I have never seen a case where we have been.
There's no wood around here.
Like, we always cover the attorney's costs
Mhm.
to,
Defend you.
defend you.
Right.
Would that happen if you're on the way to work in uniform? And let's say you stop at a car accident and help?
No.
No,
'Cause aren't we
No.
legally supposed to stop if we're in uniform?
Not in New York State. And I think that's Good Samaritan at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
You'd be
you'd
covered under a Good
constantly
Samaritan law.
covered under that, but you're covered, I don't think you have to
You do
get.
not.
Oh, I drive right past it. When I'm off the clock, screw people.
And when I do say get thrown under the bus, what I mean is that you've done something egregious enough that, you know, you've gotten fired for it, you've violated, you know, the company's SOPs, you know, you've done something totally away from the company, that they will, you know, cut you off, they will disclaim you, that there's no way we even trained you to work that way, which is a very, you know, I don't even see it happening, so.
Earlier you said that in a civil suit, they could go after like everything you have, everything your spouse has, stuff like that. Is there anything you can do like legally to protect your spouse and their assets and stuff like that? Because I'm not worried about like.
Right,
yeah.
keep it, well.
Don't get married.
Well, that's the family law attorney in me, so, but now you're taking away my business when you get divorced, so.
Right, well, prenup.
Prenup.
That's why funny aside is that they asked me, you know, somebody asked me one time about my view on, you know, gay marriage, and I was like, well, shit, it's gay divorce, are you kidding me? I said, that's plenty of work for me, so that just doubles my workload, that's all, so. But, from a financial point of view, yes, by not having any of those things in your name, you know, joint bank accounts, joint, you know, ownership of a house, things like that. However, from the family law attorney with me, is that the problem with not having that makes it difficult if you were to ever get into a divorce situation, or the other spouse passes away, and then, you know, it makes things a little bit messier, that's all. So it really ends up being, you know, what is your goal, so the likelihood of a divorce or your spouse passing away is probably much greater than you getting sued for getting, doing something wrong on the job, so. Other thoughts, comments? Well, hopefully you can tell your coworkers here that you enjoyed this enough that when I'm invited back again, that they'll come in and we'll talk about there's plenty of other topics out there that DNRs and mults and terminations and just more deeply into the civil, you know, negligence versus malpractice type of thing. So, vehicle liability, all sorts of different things, so.
It would be a good one, we do a lot of work with lifetime care on
Mhm.
hospice patients.
Oh, yeah, right, so.
It is
And we have
probably once a
questions
month
sometimes.
occurrence where somebody dies in the ambulance as we're transporting them to the hospice center.
Right.
And we do not have paperwork on them yet, because the most hasn't been signed, or just being discharged from the
Yeah.
hospital, whatever, and it's kind of a legal nightmare.
Yes,
Um,
as well as a practical nightmare, 'cause
Yeah,
you're sitting
yeah.
there with a dead body in your vehicle.
Yeah.
Do I go this way, do I go this way? Will you take it or will you take
We're
it?
not supposed to transport dead bodies.
Right.
Like, you got a dead body to the driveway,
Yeah,
and, well, you got the live body to the driveway and they died, then what do you do with it?
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, so we run into that.
Bill, thank you so much for
Oh, no,
coming.
very
We
welcome.
really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure, I
Yeah,
love doing
thank
this,
you,
so.
thank you very much.